is sponsored by professional photographers.
Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Going to give it a few more minutes, let people get in here. Hope everyone's doing well. Hey, Justin, how's it going? Hey, Robin. Hey, Levi, how's it going? Good to hear. I'm just gonna call you. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Garg? Garg? I'm not sure. Sorry if I butchered that. Hey, Hermie. Some new names in here that I haven't seen before. Hope everyone's doing well. I'll start in like a minute. Although, I don't exactly have a photo picked out. I have gone through pretty much my whole library that was from the Dolomites area. And I was hoping that we would decide on what to pick. Garg. Garg? Is it a hard G at the end, or is it more like Garge? I don't know. Hey, Jurgen. Hey, Simon. Hope you guys are doing well. Hey, Mazam. All right, so I'll transition over to this and we can talk about it. We were in the Dolomites for, I guess it looks like I shot for 6 days. Obviously, some of those days were involved traveling. And most of the time, I was shooting sunrise and sunset, and then in betweens, we were doing hikes or something. But one day, I think we just did a hike to this lake. That was pretty intense. But I've kind of gone through and picked out all of the photos that are probably worth editing. Some of these are already selected from edits I've already done, but quite a few in here are things I haven't touched or I want to retouch. So I was actually going to see, hey Luca, how's it going? I was actually going to see what we wanted to look at first, and maybe if you guys wanted to decide what we looked at, we could do it that way, and if nobody has really any opinion, then I can just choose. I do know that one photo I have never posted or done anything with was the thumbnail for this stream, is this edit, and I still want to finalize this. I've already edited it once, but I'm not sure it's where I want it to be. And I actually went back through and opened this TIFF up, and I destructive edited it, so I don't have the layers that I blended together still there, which I guess I did a couple years ago because I thought that I didn't love the edit and I was just going to redo it. I don't know. So we might start with this one, but I will say it's definitely more involved than some other ones. There's some really simple ones. Like, I know this is a silly picture, but I kind of love it, of these cows in front of 𝐒𝐸𝐚𝐥𝐬, which I think is awesome. And if there's another photo in here that you see, feel free to speak up. This is all the same photo, but I have liked a bunch of them because these are all the focus stacks that I would have to do here. So it's these 4 that would be focus stacked. Then this one for the light in the background. And then I think I liked a few more for possible other light in the background if we wanted to do that one. Also pretty involved. And there's some really simple photos in here that I just can't decide if they're worth editing, what I want to do, that kind of thing. So if you guys have opinions, feel free. I think the one that I really want to do is probably this one. But again, I don't even know. I don't necessarily know if I need to redo the whole thing. Thanks, Glenn. All right, so 1 vote for the church. Got it. So it's these 2 raws put together, if I remember correctly. So I chose this one because it has the light on the foreground and the background for this one. The problem is the final version, which is this. I'm trying to decide if these two images because the problem is the final version, it just feels like the foreground's great, like lighting wise, but there's such a dark background and then just bright mountains that it almost doesn't look real. And I'm thinking, I guess it's the process of trying to figure out why it looks just a tiny bit too processed. And I'm thinking maybe it's just the mountains are a little bit too bright. Hey, Justin. Thanks. So that's kind of where I'm at with this edit. Now, I don't remember the blend being that hard because I think what I did was I just took the dark parts of the trees up here and left them, I think. And then I just kind of blended the light in the foreground and left this all dark. Basically just using the dark trees here because otherwise they just don't line up. You can tell there's definitely a difference. These were taken at slightly different times and I think I reframed the shot a little bit. So blending these together could be hard, but if you do it the right way, it's not too bad. The question really is, can I get better than this in my blend? And I'm not entirely sure. I think when I look at this image that I've done, my issue again is that the light in the foreground to the light in the background doesn't make sense. All right. Well, let's just start out. So I think I've already preliminarily edited these, as in I've done the 2 changes that I want, but I think I might redo them a little bit. So those little changes are things like removing the sharpening, turning on chromatic aberration, or removing it, boosting the blue saturation to 100. A few other things I could play with here that I didn't do the first time I did this. But a lot of this is just very minimal edits before I take it into Photoshop. I don't think there's much I want to change here. Again, I'm looking at this edit that I've done and trying to think about how I want to make the mountains in the background slightly more realistic to blend with the light in the foreground. And I don't think there's a whole lot that I can do because obviously this is the exposure that I'm using. I've boosted the shadows in this one quite a bit so that I could blend a little easier with this one as well. So I don't think there's much I'm going to change about the two before I take them to Photoshop. So let's just open them up. It's going to take it a second since they're both DNGs. Hope everyone's doing well. If you guys have any questions, you can feel free to ask anything. Those are just loading in, so I'm just giving him a chance. Luca, you said you like the one with the church in the middle. I'm using both. So I'm just using both exposures to blend them together. So it wasn't necessarily about the composition. It was more about which photo, not which photo, but I'm going to be blending them together. The dog down there is Luna. The other dog is Stella, and she's in my girlfriend's office right now. I don't share out my raw photos. Sorry, man. At some point, I might share out a photo for like a stream event where I share a photo to people and they can edit it, and then I then get back their edits. That could be fun, but I don't typically share out my raws. Okay, this is loaded in. We'll go back to that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just combine both of these. Sorry, not combine. Align both of these. So I'm just going to select both and go to auto align layers. What it's going to do is the middle of the picture will be pretty well aligned, but there will be some differences in the trees. So if I zoom in pretty far, you can see there's slight variation in the trees there, but it does a pretty good job overall. I think, if I remember correctly, when I used this background layer, I just ended up using the trees here rather than trying to blend in the trees that are here, so that I didn't have to go through the headache of having all of this little foliage with issues. And then I just painted light, because a lot of the light is naturally right here anyways, so it's not a huge deal. So this is just on a 70-200 2.8, but if I were to go back and buy the lens again, I would buy the f4. The only other lens I use is 16 and 35. So I'm going to start with this as the background, and then we're just going to basically paint in the light in the foreground to blend them together. Again, it's not a very complicated edit. Yeah, I don't, I'm not a big gear person. I pretty much, personally, I don't even want to carry more than the two lenses I already carry. So I just carry those two and a camera, and obviously a bunch of film equipment now. But back then I was like, with this trip to Europe, it was a 7-week trip, and we didn't check any luggage. So I had 2 bags. One bag was for hiking and my camera gear, and then I had a bag for all my clothes, and basically just backpacked through Europe without checking any luggage. Went super minimal. So I had like 1 pair of pants and 2 pairs of shorts and 4 shirts. And that's how I got by. It was pretty sweet though. I think ultimately the best part about it, photography wise, was just really learning how minimal I could go. And I think that's pretty much how I shoot now. I really don't want more than the 2 lenses that I carry with me. And there's very rarely a time when I'm missing a focal length, I guess. All right, so the easiest way to blend these together is, the issue is here, I'm not really blending light, so I'm not trying to take like the brightest parts of one image and blend it with the other. I kind of just want to take all the light from the foreground or the background layer. So even though I'm going to use a shadows mask 1 from here, it should still give me a decent amount of data for the trees here, which is what I'm going to use it on first. And then I'm probably going to actually just paint in the foreground without using a mask. So let's do that. And I'm not using a tablet at the moment, but I might bust it out if I need to. Make sure I got set to black, and then I'm just going to paint in. Now it's going to look a little weird here because of that mask, so I'm going to have to go back over that. And again, one of the issues I'm going to have is I'm going to have to be careful up here on the ridge line, because that is where the trees tend to get, you know, where they're going to blend incorrectly. So if I were to go in here and paint, it's not going to look great. So I have to be a little cautious there. I don't have to be precise anywhere down below though. I'm pretty much just going to fill this entire foreground with black. I'm actually going to deselect the mask and just make sure we have everything. I'm at 100% opacity. Because like I said, I really just wanted the background from the one image, and I wanted all the light for the foreground. And then what we'll do is I'll probably paint in some light here using just the foreground. It's just TK Action Panel, but Luminance or Radial Pro or whatever would also be perfectly fine. I don't use a lot of this stuff. I just pretty much use the Luminosity Masks. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. Now we're going to go back. I'm going to turn off the mask. That's not the button I wanted to hit. Okay, for some reason my shortcut is not working. So if you ever want to use the shortcut that I do, I don't know why this got turned off. It seems to happen when I update Photoshop. I think it's layer mask somewhere in here. Yep. And then enable, disable. There it is. I set it to Control W. Obviously you can set it to whatever you want. And now I can look at my images with the layer mask turned off and on, which is I do a lot to see what my blend is. So I'm just going to turn it off to select the mask again. And then I'm going to get up here and get a little technical. By technical, I just mean not painting in giant brush strokes. And I'm going to paint a little bit lighter, so 30% at a time. And I'm just going to come up here and make sure that this blend looks okay. And I'm just painting it with black on that luminosity mask. This part of the trees is going to look okay, just because if you look at this image, it naturally goes from bright to dark up here. And this dark value is pretty close to what this is in our top image. So blending this part together is actually not that hard. But you can tell the light here is a little bit off. You can also see the haze in this particular image that was in this one. The haze is really showing up. That's something we'll have to deal with and try to combat as well. So this is where the challenge comes in, right? Is I don't want to bring that too much of that haze into the image, but that is what's happening in our brighter image. And I kind of have to figure out how to basically blend the haze layer with the background layer without it looking too awkward. So I think what I'm going to do is actually blend out some of that. So we're going to actually use our dark layer for these trees. And I think that's what ended up happening here when I did this edit originally, is that blending this side was easy, but then I kept this side dark because our bright layer is so hazy in that area here. Right here specifically. I can probably get away with using some of this if I can blend it correctly. But I just have to be careful on how I'm doing that. So I'm going to go through and try to remove some of those hazy spots. Keeping a little bit of haze is fine. It's basically the coloration of that blue that is distracting. So just going to do that. Hey, Kadar, how's it going? I think even our 31% is too high. I'm going to go down to 10%. I'm going to try to paint in where the ridge line is the darkest here. And I'm using a pretty big brush at the moment. I'm going to bring my hardness down more. Actually, let's just do this. Right now I'm making sure that there's not a dark area of trees, like a line of dark trees that makes our blend obvious. So I'm just brightening up those trees using the brighter layer. But basically what happens is if I zoom out a lot, you'll see basically it'll go from this hazy tree area to basically dark. And that's what we're trying to prevent. So I kind of have to go back and forth. I'm going to paint back in the dark layer a little bit here. And we're just going to basically massage it back and forth to get this area of the trees looking how we want. Now the worst haze was right here. So this is kind of where I want to target. The problem is because it blends with this area where we want the light, it can make it a little bit difficult. And you can see that's happening. I've already darkened this tree here and this tree here, and I don't want that. So we're going to have to go back through and fix that a little bit. But basically what happens is if I have too much of this hazy layer blended in, it's going to look like there's a halo there. And that is what we're trying to prevent. So what I'm going to do is actually come in, increase my opacity by a bit, and then just paint a lot right here. And then I'm going to try to get precise on some of these trees in the foreground. Right now I'm just trying to get the balance of this haze correct. So that is too dark. Let's decrease this. And I think we're getting close. Again, there's really just not a lot of information here that we care about for the actual photo. There's no light on it. It's pretty dark. And like from this photo, I don't even care about the trees in this version. And I don't really care about the trees in this version because it's all dark anyways. I think this is pretty close and looking pretty good. So I'm now going to go back in and see if we can fix these little trees here that we want. So the best way to do that, let's see, what do you think the best way is? Let's try to use a lights mask and maybe it can grab this. Nope. It's going to be hard because all of this is pretty much in shadow. And I'm not really going to get a good selection here because the separation between these two layers is not very much. So I think what I'm going to try to do is just paint gently and lightly to just add a little bit of light back into these trees. And then hopefully not too much haloing happens. And if it does, we'll try to fix it. So I'm going to turn this layer on and off. Yeah, you can see that all of these could be lightened up quite a bit. And I'm using a low opacity so that I have a little bit more control over being able to paint this stuff in. And I'm basically just trying to bring back some of the detail that's there. But if I paint here, you can see it starts to blend too much of the rock in the background from this version, which is what we're trying to prevent. So I have to get kind of tedious here. It's going to take a little bit of time. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. But basically, I'm just going to be going back and forth, trying to get the light back on these trees. It's looking pretty good so far. And as long as some of the light is there, I don't need it to be this bright. As long as some of it's there, I think it's fine. Otherwise, it'll get very hard to blend between these two layers. We're just trying to make it look natural. It doesn't have to be perfectly blended from this particular one. Nah, I don't think the refine edge is going to do anything. There's just too much foliage. Personally, because these two, I mean, even if I'm at 400% here, the difference between this background layer and this layer is so minimal that I don't think Photoshop would ever pick it up. And it's just one of those things that I just have to manually blend in, which is fine. It happens. And then I just have to make sure it looks right. So again, I'm just going through this and trying to brighten up this section of the trees a bit. I'm using big strokes down here because I'm not too worried about the blend between the rocks at the top, and I'm going to go back through there and make sure it looks good. So far it looks pretty good. The good news is a lot of this tree foliage would never actually be seen unless someone's at super zoomed in. Now, if I printed this picture very large, that's why I'm taking the time to make sure it looks right, because someone could potentially order a print that is this large or very large. And those kind of details could get seen. Thankfully with foliage, a lot of the times if there's a little bit of wind or something like that, some of this stuff would naturally be a tiny bit blurry or blurred together. So it's not the end of the world. The important stuff is where all this light is. Like these trees need to look pretty crisp, and they do. These trees back here, it's not nearly as important, even though they do look pretty good already. So again, I'm just coming in here, and I'm at about 30% opacity. This might be a little faster if I switch to my pen, but I'm just using a mouse right now because I always try to avoid using my pen unless I need pressure sensitivity stuff. And that's just me feeling more comfortable with the mouse, pretty much. That's the only reason. So now I'm going to get a little bit closer to the edge here. Now, there is a decent amount of separation. You might be asking why I'm not using some kind of select to separate here, because there is a decent amount of separation between this layer and the background layer. The problem is, like I said, because these two images were slightly off, there is a shift. Just an ever so slight shift here. It's probably very hard to see. So I don't want to just basically come in here. So what I could do, for example, is I could come in here and select darks 2 and use this selection. That'll probably give me a more precise selection for here. And if I started painting in, it's not going to hit the rocks very much, which is fantastic. But what'll end up happening is because that shift happens, I'll start to add little artifacts in between the two. And I just want to be careful there. Now that I have a stronger mask, though, I'm going to increase my opacity. I will say that this blend seems a little bit stronger than the first one. I remember having more trouble with artifacting because of the shift. But it seems like this one, when I turn the mask or the layer on and off, the shift is so minimal that I can come in here and almost do exactly what I just said, which was paint right on the trees without an issue. The problem is if I paint too much here, you'll see it starts to brighten up those spots even though I have that mask selected. So I just have to be careful there, and I have to be a little gentle. So let's bring this back down. I don't want to paint too big. You can actually see when it happens. If I paint right here, you can see I just painted all of this area even though I have that mask selected. So, and again, it doesn't have to be super precise in this particular image because, like I said, there's not even in our layer that we're blending from the background layer. It doesn't actually bring out the trees all that much, so it's not super important. We just want to make sure it looks natural and that there's a lot of data there if we can have it. For the most part, these trees are probably going to remain pretty dark just because that's how the light was hitting the trees at the time. But this is just part of doing a long editing process, is that you kind of have to go through and do this if you want it to look really good. How large? Well, it's not for me. I mean, if someone wanted it large, the largest print I've ever done is 80 by 30 or 60 by 40. So yeah. But it's mostly what someone would want if they ordered a print. Okay. I think this is looking pretty good. Let's look at our background. There's still some light here that needs to come out. Okay. So I'm going to increase my opacity by basically 100 and then just kind of try to get these to come out a little bit more here. Oh, thanks, Madison, for the sub. Welcome. Oh, my little mini feed is not it's not working. Oh, I think we're about to get a few sub notifications. I don't know what it is with YouTube, or Streamlabs or something, but sometimes like 4 or 5 subs will just come in, even though they're subscribing from, I don't know, watching one of my videos yesterday or something. It's really strange. And they're not actually coming from the stream. But I could be wrong. But I think that's usually what happens. Regardless, if you do sub and you're new here, thank you. I think we're almost done with these trees, and it's looking pretty good. And I'll take a closer look at stuff. Yeah, so that's blended well. Let's come in here and make sure this is all good. And then, again, I have to make sure, basically what I'm trying to prevent, and it might be hard to see on YouTube, is that you can see that it's bright right here in the trees enough to actually see the foliage. But when I get up here, it gets so dark that it's almost black. And I'm trying to prevent that when I zoom out that there's just a black line right here. That's what I'm trying to do. And so far, I think we've done a good job because, again, this foreground image was naturally dark right here. The light was only hitting basically here in the foreground of the part of the image. So that made this blend a lot easier. However, I think the issue with this particular photo is that if I turn this mask off, is that the only thing getting hit by light in our background image is the mountains. So it's challenging because it creates this weird fall of light. And what I mean by that is I'm blending a foreground image that looks like this, where the light is falling here, and I'm blending a background image where it's only falling on the mountains. And I'm just trying to make sure that if someone saw this initially, they wouldn't immediately think, oh, something weird is going on here. And if we can get it to the point where it just looks like maybe there was a cloud in this area and it was hitting the back of the mountains and then the foreground at the same time, then I'll be happy. But as of right now, it's still a little bit too separated. And we just got to figure out if we can fix that. Also, I hope you guys can hear me well and that the music isn't too loud or anything. I'm going to come in here and just, let's bring this back down. Try to fix up some of these little dark spots a little bit more. Just so to be careful to not have that basically dark layer I was talking about between the trees and the background. It's not necessarily a color balance thing, mostly because I will say that this might be a tad warmer than the foreground, and then I probably need to warm the foreground up. For me, it's more of this weird separation between the background mountains and the trees. But I do think I will have to warm the foreground up a little bit. But I think we're going to do that by painting in some warmer light. So, just want to make sure that I get this light looking good. And I think we're pretty close on these trees here. I know this is probably tedious, and I'm putting you guys to sleep. But that is kind of the process on an image this involved. By the way, I should point out that a lot of people sell tutorials and stuff that explain how to do some of this stuff probably better than I'm doing live. And I'm hoping to make those tutorials eventually, where they're a little bit more involved, a little more thought out, in the sense that sometimes when I'm doing live streams, I'm saying a lot of stuff as I'm trying to figure out what to do. Whereas if you were to watch a tutorial, it's more planned. I have an exact idea of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. So I hope the live streams help in some way, and they're not too off the cusp, I guess, and you still learn stuff. That's my goal. Because otherwise, why would you watch it, right? But I don't know. I hope that I don't blab on too much and say a bunch of nonsense. Because some of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially trying to converse while I'm doing it. Oh, thank you, Hermie. And if you've joined in my live streams before, you'll know that sometimes I'll get to a photo and I don't know what to do with it off the bat. And sometimes I just don't know what to do with it that day. So right now I'm trying to blend a little bit better here where these trees are, but it's tough because I'm definitely hitting the background where that haze is. And as soon as I hit that haze, it makes like a haloing effect. So it's definitely making it more difficult. Okay. I think we're pretty much done over there. If I see something later, I can fix it. And again, you can see this haze layer here. I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to warm this area up a bit. Let's make sure our foreground, everything here on the church and stuff is all using the foreground image. So basically what I'm going to do is, because I have this mask turned on, everything down here should be just this background layer. And I'm going to turn this image on and off, and I shouldn't notice any change. And if I notice any change, that means that something with the mask isn't pushing through. And I'm not seeing anything. So I think we're good there. I'm just looking at all the dark areas here to see if there's any change. I should actually probably have a macro or a shortcut to disable and enable that visibility of that layer. Probably something I will do next time around. Okay, so I think our blend is good. So that means that I'm pretty much done blending between the two layers. And the next thing, well, hold on. I'm noticing it's a little too bright right here. So, sorry. Making sure I don't miss a particular text or phone call. Normally I have my phone on silent, but... Okay. What was I doing? Oh yeah, darkening the spot. Apologies. Yeah, the spot's just a tiny bit too bright. So let's go back in. I still have my mask selected, which is good. I can tell that by this still being lit up green because it auto hides that. And so I'm going to want to darken. That's too much. I need to bring that down. Let's go down to like 10%. Yeah. And I'm just trying to darken up just this spot right here. And again, that's just removing some of that haze pretty much. That looks a little better. There's still like a little bit happening right here. Okay. I think that looks pretty good. We brought some of the detail from that brighter layer in. Might need to bring some more. I'm not sure. I'm wondering if maybe I just warm up this whole layer. And if I just warm up this whole layer a little bit, I think it'll help a lot. I don't know what this song is. 1 second. Let's go back here. Take off shuffle. There we go. Yes, Stu. I won't decide on the crop until the end. That's always really tough on a picture like this, though. Just because I see it in such a way that I was editing a certain way and I want it like this, and then other people might be able to look great like this. Definitely it will be a hard decision on how to crop this. So what I'm thinking now is maybe it would be easier to blend this together if this layer was a tiny bit warmer, so that I remove, because if I warm this up, the haze won't look as bad. Yeah. So I'm going to camera raw filter this layer, and then I think I'm going to do two things that I could have done in Lightroom, by the way. I could have done this before I brought them into Photoshop. But I think what I'm going to do is just warm it up ever so slightly, probably +5. And then I'm going to radial filter. Let's see. Let's do one small one for this section right here. I'm not really worried about the mountain or anything like that. Really just want this spot. And what I'm going to do is, I don't want these selections. I'm going to dehaze it just a little bit. Okay, maybe a lot of it. Let's do +20. And then I'm kind of just playing around here trying to get... That doesn't look too bad. But I don't want to warm up all of this. So again, this is going to look a little strange. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to do a graduated filter here. And I think I'm going to warm up. Let's keep the dehaze up. And again, I'm only looking at these hills right here. That's all I care about, because all this part down here I'm trying not to affect, and all this part up here is using the other image. I'm going to warm it up even more, and I'm just fighting that haze pretty much. And we could even bring up the exposure just a little bit. Yeah, and then I'm going to hit OK. We'll let that happen. I'm going to turn this layer back on. Okay. And now, if I come in here and try to paint back in some of this hillside, let's undo mask 2, see if we can get a good selection here to make sure I'm decently separated from here. That's probably fine. And then again, I'm going to use a light brush here. And let me make sure I'm painting with black. Sorry about that. Sometimes I get confused what color I'm supposed to be painting with. And then I'm going to come in here and paint some of that light back in. Now that we've warmed it up a bit and dehazed that little spot, maybe it's not nearly as bad to bring in. The other thing is, if I bring this in, one of the steps I can do at the end when the photo is done is I can dehaze that spot a little bit more, or just decrease the blue in that area. But we're still getting some weird, it still looks a little patchy. The blend is not doing well right there. So let's keep working on that. And I think I'm actually bringing more haze in. No, I think we're okay. Let's make sure I'm not hitting those rocks up there. Yeah, I did a little bit. Okay. Got to be a little bit more careful there. You can actually see that black line is happening right here. Might be hard to see on YouTube. So I'm going to have to address that. And as soon as we get that blend done, the rest of the photo is not too hard. I think what I'll do is probably contrast paint some light in the foreground on the hills. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So, hope everyone's doing well, having a good day. Right now I'm fighting a bunch of stuff that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because I'm not even sure with the detail that YouTube streams at, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm doing and these little small color shifts that are happening. It's mostly this spot right here that is just giving me a lot of pain, just because there was a lot of haze in the original image. All right, so come in here. And now I'm going to try to fight a little bit with that black line. So I'm just going to come in here and paint gently. We can probably bring up the opacity a little bit just because my mask is pretty strong. Oh, those birds. That's cool. And I'm basically just going to paint a little bit here. That's probably too strong on the opacity. And I'm just trying to make sure that there's just not a black line where the tops of the trees go to the mountains. I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. I think warming it up helped. So here's an issue. Because I do like that there's a little bit of light here. And I would like that into the image. But the problem is, if I come in here and start to paint in this hill, well, it looks a little bit better now. So let's just go with it. Okay. Before it was not looking great. I'm just going to zoom way out. See if there's any, basically I call it like splotching of little hints of where the haze is. It's definitely still haze right here, and that's where the haze was the strongest. Don't remember if I shot this with a circular polarizer. Pretty sure I did, judging by how the clouds are and stuff, but I actually can't tell. All right, so now that we've done that, I need to come in here and redo a little bit of these trees. And then I think we're almost done with blending those two layers together enough. So if you have any questions or you're just joining in, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk, waffle on about blending trees together for 30 minutes. But that is kind of the process here. And I think a lot of people probably wonder why you spend so much time doing something like this, or if it's worth it. And I'll gladly admit that on some photos, a lot of photos, I wouldn't go through the efforts. But I do think that this photo has potential to be good enough. And I just want the blend to be good so that in case I do post it to more than just Instagram or someone ever wants it printed, that it's ready to go. Because I always shoot for that. I always, even if I'm posting on for just Instagram or a mobile phone or whatever, I at the very least want it to be presentable for print if someone ever requests it. Okay. I think that looks pretty good overall. So normally I don't do this yet, but I'm going to do it now since I know we're going to get rid of all that data anyways. I'm not necessarily going to... Actually, do I want to stretch the bottom out a little bit before I do this? So these two are pretty much blended together and they're good to go. And if I notice anything, I can come back and change this blend. I'm not going to destructively edit this like I did last time. So some other things I want to do is add some contrast to kind of paint light a little bit better here. I think I did that in the original image. You can see it's a tiny bit darker here and a little bit brighter here. I like that. So I'm going to do the same thing. I also think that did I remove anything? I don't think so. I'm going to deselect my mask. Why is this still selected? That's weird. I don't notice any barrel distortion. So this is like this because it's a pano, D&G. So to make these images, that's why these are so detailed, is it's these images together. And I don't think there was any distortion, barrel distortion, because I'm shooting at 7200. I think what happened is that my camera is aimed down just ever so slightly, so the bottom portion of the image is scrunched, whereas the top portion is not. I'm just trying to decide if I want to. I think what I'm going to do is I am going to stretch the bottom a little bit, and you might be wondering why. And I just want to stretch the bottom so that I have a tiny bit more room to crop if I ever want to have a really wide crop. So all I'm going to do for that is go to transform, warp, and then I'm just going to, oh, I have the wrong thing selected. Maybe I should, typically I don't warp until the very end. So I think I'm just going to wait to do that then. Because normally what I'll do is stamp down all my layers. I have to decide where I want to leave it then. I think there's probably good. And then I have to come all the way there. And no, I kind of like this cloud, so I might warp in that part. So you'll see that there's spaces here that don't have anything. And what I'll end up doing at the end is potentially just stretching this up a little bit to make it square. But I don't normally do that until the last step, just because I use a stamped layer of the whole image after I'm done editing it and then stretch it out. So I'll probably stretch this corner here. I don't really consider that all too image altering. You'll barely ever be able to tell. And the reason for that is just in case I, for some reason, want as much possible part of the photo to crop as, you know, depending on for the print or the size or the resolution or something like that. I just want the most to play with later. So I leave in as much as I can. Okay. So the next thing is let's paint in some contrast. So I want to darken some parts of the foreground to add a little bit more contrast into these areas. Now it's going to be slightly difficult just because a lot of this foreground is all the same luminance value, meaning typically I can use luminance masks to darken spots that are already somewhat dark or brighten spots that are somewhat bright. Let's say I had snow on an image that has other stuff around it. That snow is way easier to separate and brighten up. So this is kind of be a little challenging, but I'm only going to do it ever so slightly. Oh, levels is not what I want. I don't usually use levels. I'm more of a curves kind of person. Also the button I don't want to hit. So I'm just going to use curves to darken a little bit. And then I'm just going to inverse that layer. And then all we're going to do, I'm still going to use a mask to kind of select this part. Although I really don't know if I'm going to be able to get a good selection. That's not the button I want. Okay, that's probably pretty good. And then I'm just going to use probably 20% and paint in white here. I guess we need more. That mask is pretty strong. I'm just going to darken. So I'm trying to follow this contour of this hill right here. It's probably hard to see. I'm just darkening the foreground a little bit. Right there. And I can show you what I just did. That's what I've done so far. It's kind of hitting too much here. So let's make sure we don't do that. I'm going to bring my hardness up just by about 20%. So it's not as soft. And I'm just bringing some of that brightness out of the foreground. Then I'm going to want to come in here. And again, I'm just kind of following the contours of the hills here. Might be hard to see on YouTube. And I'm going to darken this. Now, I can always pull this back some if I get it too dark. But basically what I wanted to do there is darken the foreground ever so slightly so that my eye immediately either goes to the church or the mountains in the background, so that it's not all the same luminance value here in the foreground, because otherwise your eyes tend to not know where to go. But just something that ever so slightly darkens the foreground like this, especially when I add like contrast to the whole image, will help. So I'm going to kind of do this again for just a little bit of these areas right here, but I'm going to bring this down because I don't want to do it too much. And this is basically just dodging and burning. I'm just doing it in a way that's not using the actual dodge and burn tools. So if you're familiar with that, that's all I'm really doing. It's not going to require much. I do think I want to darken some of this back here. Even though I like the light here, I don't necessarily want people to see. Oh, I think that's what did I Photoshop out those cars? No, I left them. Okay. I'm just darkening this up ever so slightly, and I absolutely want to darken this little spot here. So I'm actually going to deselect my mask and just make sure I'm just darkening the whole thing. Just because this is a bright object on the corner of the edge of the screen. And even though this might end up getting cropped out, it's a little bit distracting. And I don't want it to be too bright. Same with the hay bales in the background. So I'm just darkening that up a little bit. So. Luca, it's very rare if I ever do 16:9 unless I'm exporting for like a desktop background. Morning, Jordan. Normally print sizes are not 16:9. So, okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I might want to darken the foreground just a little bit more. So I'm actually going to paint without a mask, and we're just going to paint in a little bit more here. And I might even crop a little bit of the bottom out. And I'm going to paint this little spot again. And the reason I'm darkening this little area is to kind of give more contrast where the light is hitting. That's too much. Let's bring this down. To kind of mimic the light painting the ground here. I think that was too much. I think that's probably pretty good. Okay, so that's not too bad. Now, the next thing I want to do is paint in a little bit more warmth. So the way I'm going to do this is make sure I have deselected my mask. I'm going to come in here and select a color in this cloud here. That's pretty good, but I want to brighten it a little bit. That looks good. And then I'm going to fill my whole image with that color. 6 a.m. I hope you didn't wake up for this stream. But if you did, thank you. All right. Then I'm going to select soft light. Now, obviously, this is not how I want my image to look. I'm going to create a mask and invert it. And what I'm going to do is use a Luminosity Mask to hopefully, yeah, that's a decent enough selection, I think. So I'm going to make that selection. Let's see what it does. Okay. And then this opacity is not as important because I can just decrease the opacity of the whole image. Sorry, the whole layer, not the whole image. And I'm just going to paint in some color, which is also going to brighten up these spots a little bit right here. I'm basically just painting in just ever so slightly some touches of light on these hills right here, just to make sure that your eye, I'm just going to paint in the church a little bit. I could turn this off and on, and you can see it's just creating a nice little soft glow. Let's also do it for the trees. Now I might want to do 2 layers so that I have better separation. And remember, I have that Luminance Mask, so it's only really hitting the brighter parts of the image, not all those shadows. I don't want to add too much because otherwise it'll look unrealistic. But I'm kind of just painting in. Now I want to make sure I have 100% softness. Just painting in a little bit of color there. We can paint in a tiny bit here as well. But let me make sure I follow what actually is there. So there's a line of light right here. That looks good. We can hit this little spot here. That looks good. And I'm just painting in some more warmth into the image. It's also brightening up the spots that I want to brighten, all in one step. It's pretty subtle, but I think it's looking pretty good. And I might bring it down some as well if I paint too much in. Because we don't want our grass to look translucent or too bright. I do think it's looking a little bit too colored. So what I'm going to do is just bring down the opacity here. And I think that looks pretty good. Hey, Billin, how's it going? Well, Jordan, thank you for joining. Sorry you got woken up. And thank you for the compliment. So you can tell that, I'm hoping. Let me look at my stream to see if you can actually... Yeah, you can see it on YouTube. A lot of these changes are so subtle, I always worry that the compression would kill them. But you can see I've kind of added in a little bit of warmth to the image. I've also brightened up a little bit of spots on the grass. Now, the thing that you want to be careful of is if you do this too much, what's going to end up happening is it's just going to look like it's glowing, which is obviously not what we want. We want it to look like the light is falling on it. And thankfully, our original image, the light is falling on it. So it makes it a little bit easier when we're using the Luminosity Mask. I'm going to keep painting in a few spots here. Like this little spot is nice. And I'm actually going to deselect the mask. I'm going to paint in some warmth up here in these trees. But I'm going to bring my opacity down. Let's see what happens if I paint a tiny bit of warmth back here where that haze is. Let's see. I don't think it's doing a whole lot. It's definitely brightening up that part of the image though, which I don't want to do necessarily. So I'm just kind of painting where the light already falls. And you can see it's hitting the tops of those trees and stuff really well because I have that light, I have the soft light selected as the layer blend mode. And now you can see it's just brightening up those spots in the trees pretty well. I need to bring this down. I only have the opacity at 5% and I have the layer opacity at like 50%, and it's still doing a pretty good job of it actually making changes. Now I don't want it over here because that spot's already too bright. I'm actually going to come back into this layer and darken up this spot. I'm going to have to increase my opacity back up, and I want to darken this just ever so slightly. I want the light to hit here, but I don't want it to hit over here on the edge of the screen. So I'm just darkening up this stuff again. And even though there's still light hitting there, I could turn this off and on. That would naturally be happening. We're just darkening it just enough to help our viewer's eye right into the center of the image. And I think that's looking pretty good. I think we're actually almost done with the image in Photoshop because we've added a little bit of warmth to our foreground. We've painted in some contrast. I do think what I'm going to do is I think I want to continue darkening up the foreground a little bit more and playing with that. So let's do that now. I think I'm done adding in this warmth and light. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So you made a layer mask using a brighter color from the clouds. No. If you're talking about the color that I'm using, so I just created a new layer, selected the color of the clouds, brightened it up ever so slightly, and then filled the layer with that color, and then set the layer mask, the blend layer to soft light, and then I masked it and started painting it in. Basically, I just used the color of the cloud to replicate the color that the sun is creating on the foreground. And you can tell it's naturally brightened up those spots that we painted in as I'm turning it off and on, but you can also tell it warmed up those spots. That's what I'm doing. I think the church is fine. I don't mind if it's a little bright right here. I want it to look like it's getting hit by sun because it is. It might look blown out on YouTube, but I think that it's fine. Okay, what was I doing? Oh yeah, one more layer to darken. One more layer to bind them. Sorry, Lord of the Rings reference. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do, kind of getting an idea of what happens when I add some contrast in the image. I'm actually going to create a contrast curve here, invert the mask, and I'm basically going to just use that to darken this foreground. But the reason I use the contrast curve is there's a little bit of hints of light here and there. And I actually think it'll look better this way instead of just darkening the foreground altogether. If I just paint in this, and it'll add a tiny bit of contrast while also darkening up that area. Now I want to be careful because I want this strip of light that's hitting right here on this hill to remain. That's a little bit too bright, so let's bring down the opacity. I want this little strip of light right there to stay. I want all of that to stay. And I'm kind of just trying to create contrast on these hills. I'm going to darken the bottom part a little bit more. And again, some of this might get cropped out anyways. So we can see what this layer did. Just darken the foreground ever so slightly, but in a natural way. In my opinion, it doesn't look like I just stuck a graduated filter on there and darkened it. It looks like the light almost falls off. And the reason that is happening is because I painted more on the bottom here, and then I removed a little bit here. And I'm basically just making it go from dark to lighter right here. And I think I'm going to paint just maybe one little swatch here, right where the spot is dark. And this is definitely a spot where I should probably be using the pen. That's too dark. But I've gone this far with just the mouse, so I'm just going to stick with it for now. And I think that's looking pretty good. Let's see our brightness. And in my eyes, I will probably crop out part of this. So I'm not as worried about the foreground. So to give you an idea, I will likely crop out just a tiny bit of this to something like this, really depending on how the final image comes out. But I think this looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is stamp this. So Control Shift Alt E. I know that's a lot. It's Control Shift Command E on a Mac. And all that's going to do is take all of my layers and basically print the picture that you see on the screen. So if I only have this layer on, it's the image we just worked on. So that's done. And now what I'm going to do is warp this final image to get it to where it fills up the screen. I think warp is what we want. Yeah. And you can tell all I'm going to do is just drag this stuff so that it reaches the corners. And hopefully it doesn't look too... No, you're not ever going to be able to tell. And then I'm going to check the corners. It's going to take it a second because it's a pretty big file. Like I said, this is a 3-shot pano. And yes, I see this spot right here, but I'm going to crop that out, I think. No, let's just warp that out. I think that'll be fine. And that means that when I take it back into Lightroom, I have the choice on how to crop it with the most part of, like, as much as the image as possible. Just going around. Oh, yep, spot. Oh, okay. And I think that's good. Tiny little spot right there. Let's bring that down. Okay. Yeah, I know I could use content aware. I didn't want to. I'd rather just warp it. Because again, a lot of that distortion was happening because of the pano anyways. And warping it just uses the image rather than try to fill in with content aware. Didn't really have any reason to content aware all of those little spots. It's quicker to just warp it, I think. Okay, I think this is looking pretty good. So normally my process is I'm now going to save it, which I'll do right now. And it's going to take a little bit because it's saving to an external hard drive. And then I'm going to take it into Lightroom and do my final edits on it. And sometimes I'll go back into Photoshop and fix something. Like right now I'm looking at it and maybe this background layer could be better. Because I know that when I took this into Lightroom the last time, added sharpness back in, those kind of things. I brought the shadows up. If I reset this, this is what my blend looked like. A lot of people will finalize or do their whole edit in Photoshop. Oh. Thank you, Meep. Thank you. Thank you for the donation. A lot of people will do their whole edit in Photoshop. I tend to like to get my process is I like to get my photo where I want it for where, let's say I took one image and didn't need to do any photoshopping and I could do all of the edits in Lightroom. That's kind of where I take my photoshopping, right? So I'll either blend layers together and contrast paint and stuff like that and get it as close to almost finished as possible. And then I'll take it into Lightroom and adjust things like dehaze, sharpening, those kind of things. And I might even add a graduated filter to fix some areas that are really quick and easy. And the reason I do that is that's just always been my I guess my workflow, because technically I could come in here and fix how the background looks right in Photoshop. But a lot of the times I just am so used to using some of the tools in Lightroom that I know what I could do in there. And sometimes I even have to go back into Photoshop and fix something. But this is kind of where I leave a photo when I save it for Lightroom. Simon, it stretches it. So if I warp, I'm just noticing, no, that corner is actually not missing. If I warp just this, it stretches basically on a gradient. So like if here, I'll do it for you. So if I stretch right here, pay attention to the rocks right here. Oh God, I didn't mean to let go. Let's undo that. If you pay attention to the rocks right here as I'm stretching this corner, you can see that it's moving them ever so slightly. But it's nothing crazy. So this is where it was, and this is where I'm taking it. Like it's super small. A lot of the times I use the warp tool for fixing size things. So I have a photo of New Zealand, Mount Cook in New Zealand, that the mountain just looks way smaller than it should in the actual photo. So I warped it to be larger to fix the distortion that happens taking at 16 millimeters. Okay, so now that this is saved, we can come into Lightroom. First thing I'm going to do is add medium contrast, and that's really going to make our image pop a bit. But that's kind of expected. And you can see all of that. What's crazy is I know that the adjustments looked really small in Photoshop, but as soon as I add contrast in, all of those spots that I light painted really start to show up. Well, Jordan, I went to New Zealand for 2 weeks, and even though it's absolutely beautiful, I actually had a very hard time photographing it because it was, for some reason, overcast a lot. I got some photos, but I always look back at that trip and think that I should have gotten way more than I did. Okay, so this is our blend. This is the blend I did a few years ago. Definitely not as warm, I'm noticing. But I will say that the light value, the warmth value of our foreground and our background is far more natural than it was here, in my opinion. So what I think I'm going to do is actually cool it off a little bit, but thankfully that's going to cool off these mountains and my foreground. So even though I warmed up the photo here, because that's what I thought I wanted, what I really wanted was to make sure that the foreground color matched the mountains in the background, which I think someone said already in the chat. And now I have the ability to change the warmth of the whole image. So I'm going to cool it off slightly, maybe like -4. And that's going to get us still warm, but not as orange. Let's see. What else do I want to do? I'm liking strong contrast, but it's definitely darkening some shadows a little bit too much. So let's bring up the shadows just a little bit. And again, I want to figure out, let's try a G&D. I think I'm going to bring the highlights down of the mountains. No, that's not working either. So here's a problem. Let's bring the whites up to brighten up the image. I still feel like the mountains look unnatural. And I think it's because they're as bright as this foreground. I'm kind of just toying around here to try to figure out what exactly it is I want to do. So I'm going to make a radial filter, not invert it. And I'm darkening the whole part of the image just a tiny bit. Not much though. So I really just want to get those. I really want to just get those mountains looking more natural. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I overthinking this? Does this look good, or do the mountains just kind of look out of place? Like, should they be a little bit darker? I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit. I think actually let's do it that way so that I'm hitting this cloud. I think it's pretty close. What do you guys think? Let's crop out probably where I'd crop. I'd probably crop here. Let's see what normal print sizes will give us. Oh, okay, perfect. Well, wait, did I just click on that and it was actually already cropped that way? Oh my God, okay, sorry. I know that's crazy, but I just cropped at this point, set it to 4:5, and it literally did not move. Okay. That's cool. I'd probably crop basically like this. Let's give a little bit more breathing room to the left mountain. And I think this looks really good crop-wise, and I'll check chat in a second. But I like the crop here because the mountain starts here and ends here with almost the same amount of space here, and the church is perfectly in the middle. Maybe not perfectly. It's pretty close. And I think that looks pretty good. Try a bit cooler. So do you think the foreground should be cooler, or do you think I should cool off the background, Simon? Let's try cooling off the background. Because I do think that that's where I almost feel like it's so warm in the background it looks unnatural with the foreground. So if I cool this off a little bit more, okay. I think this is looking pretty good. I'm going to have to remove some blue out of there, I think. And it almost looks a little bit too red, so this is going to be tough to balance, but I think we can get there. The other thing to remember is I can always go back in Photoshop and just adjust this layer rather than using a G&D. if we need to do it that way. So let me turn this off and on. I think that's absolutely helping. Let's see. I'm going to remove a tiny bit of saturation. I think that should also help. I'm actually going to remove about 5 saturation to the whole image. I'm going to bring my clarity down by about 10. And let's see what happens if I bring the dehaze up a bit. I'm looking at what the dehaze is doing in both parts of the image. So just because I'm editing right here and looking at what's happening doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to dehaze the top or bottom part of the image. I'm just seeing what it does to the whole image. I like what it's doing to the foreground, but I don't like what it's doing to the background. So that means I'm just going to create another G&D here and dehaze the foreground. And all that's really doing is adding some local contrast here. And I think it looks nice. Nothing too complicated. I do need to remove some blues out of the image. So I'm going to go to saturation, remove a little bit of the blue, but not a lot because I don't want it to look too gray. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, let me check chat. Yeah, the trees are definitely dark there. And that's exactly, I don't know how long Sue, I know you've been here for a little bit. That was exactly when I looked at my old edit. The one thing I notice is that these trees, the problem is both of my edits, so here and here, those are the two images I'm using. Those trees are dark, right? So like even if I look at this bright image, that's the wrong one. Even if I look at this bright image, the light was hitting here, it's not hitting back here. And that's kind of where it's difficult, right? Is that I don't really have an image that paints in that light very well. So what I could do, I could go back into Photoshop and we could brighten that part up a little bit. Maybe ever so slightly. We could try that. Sky is too dark. So you're saying that the mountains needed to be darkened a little bit, but now the sky looks too dark, I believe. Because I think you're right. Is we darken these mountains, but now the sky is too dark. So what I can do is, now I could range mask this and select the color of these mountains so that it's only darkening the mountains. But what I think I'm going to do, because I kind of like the cloud being a little darker, is I'm going to come in here. Let's remove that. I don't think that was necessary. I'm going to come in here, make another G&D. We're going to range mask the color. I'm going to select blue and uncheck that. Show my selection. Perfect. See how when I selected blue, it also is giving me a little bit of all that gray area. And so then what I'm going to do is, instead of just bringing up the exposure, which in my opinion is not what I want, I'm going to bring up the whites. And that's going to give contrast into the sky while also brightening it up to look correct, I think. Because right now it looks a little bit too gray, a little dark and gray. So I think bringing up the whites to about something like here is pretty good. And then the last thing I'm going to do is come in here with the brush. Brush, and go to erase. And let's see, feather doesn't need to be huge. Flow. Now this is basically just opacity, like in Photoshop. I'm going to erase like right here where I just brightened up that cloud. So let's click on, I'm just making sure it's not hitting that cloud too much because I don't want that cloud to be super bright. Otherwise it's super distracting. Actually, we should probably just darken the cloud up a little bit more, but okay. So this worked really well. So what we just did is we created this graduated filter, which brought down the brightness and the color a little bit of the image, these mountains. Maybe I even cooled it off a little bit too much. But then what ended up happening is it darkened the sky a little bit too much when we brought that down. And so we just range masked, selected blue, and increased the whites to bring a little bit of that. I actually think it was too strong. So I think what I'm going to do is bring the whites up, but then also bring the contrast up. And you can see as I'm bringing the contrast up, this section of blue here is getting more saturated. And I'm trying to balance. I want it to look blue, but I don't want it to look too blue. I think that looks pretty good. Now, again, this is an image I'm going to have to come back with fresh eyes because I've been staring at it for so long. I will not just finish it and be done. I'll have to come back and say, okay, the mountains still look too orange or too whatever with fresh eyes. And I think they're still, yeah, I think these color balance shifts, I will have to check with different eyes. But I think overall it's looking pretty good. We lost a lot of viewers while I was talking about this, the nuances of this photo. So, but to be honest, that's just kind of editing. That's just kind of the process is a lot of going back and forth, trying to balance things, especially when you're working with multiple exposures or different types of light from the same location, is just trying to balance those together is really important to make it look natural. And I think this photo is pretty close. So overall, I think we're done with it for now. If you guys see anything that you would change, speak up. I will say, if I'm looking at this and critiquing it, that this cloud is still a little bit too distracting. So two ways we could fix that is obviously we could crop it out with a different crop ratio. We could also darken it ever so slightly, which might be the best course of action. But I think overall, it's looking pretty good. Maybe it's a little bit too bright right here, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So I think I would just add some sharpening in, probably about 65, mask the sharpening to about 10. It's usually my standard. And everything in the image looks pretty sharp. Our blend here, I don't think you would ever be able to tell. I blended two exposures together. I mean, there's even, wow, okay, I didn't notice that before. There's even a bunch of birds up here. I did not realize that. That's cool. You can actually tell they're birds. So yeah. I think that maybe this spot is a little too dark. Like there could be a little bit more light right here. But I actually like the way it turned out, right? So the idea was in Photoshop, I wanted to darken these foreground spots and add a little bit of darkness here to kind of almost look like, and this was actually happening in real life, so it's not like I'm just making it up, is that when the clouds were going over the sun and blocking out some of the light, that it kind of painted the light onto the hills this way. And that's kind of what I was trying to do. Yeah, so that is, Simon, that's a good point. And I'm sure, I know you've watched a lot of my streams. Is sometimes I'll just play around and see what something will look like using a radial filter. So I would come in here, do this, and then I would just bring down my highlights a little bit or my exposure just to see what it would look like. Now I'd probably luminance mask this because I don't want it to look too gray. So if I were to, let's just do it since we're here. Make sure I have the selection I want. It's going to be tough because the cloud is pretty, I guess that'll do. I don't want it to look unnatural. Just a little bit darker. Yeah, something like that does it, I think. Still looks really natural. It just darkened it up ever so slightly so that when I see it, my eye's not shooting up there. Very, very subtle. But I think overall this image is pretty much almost done. I will have to come back with it with fresh eyes. And again, might have to play with this section here and see if I can bring out any detail here. The problem is, so let's say if I wanted to just mess around and see what it would look like. If I come here and brighten up these shadows, the detail there, because it's hazy and it was naturally dark there, it just doesn't look very great. So let's range mask it. Let's make this smaller since we range masked it. Let's bring up the exposure a little bit. The shadows a little bit. Okay, I think our mask is too strong. All right, let me delete that. Yeah, I don't know. Even when I brighten this section up, it doesn't look great because it's gray right there. I don't know. I think this is pretty good. So let's move on to another photo. Got about another 30 minutes on the stream. Again, if you guys are just joining in, thank you for watching. I think this photo is pretty much done. This was the version I had before. And this is the version we just worked on. I will say the first version, these are way brighter. Actually, the whole image is a tiny bit brighter. I think I should just bring up the whites. Yeah, that's what needs to happen. That's not too bad. Because again, now that I'm bringing up the whites, this part is the same light value as the background here. And I think that looks pretty good. The other thing is, I mean, I could sit here and look at and adjust things on this photo all day. I like to zoom out to see how that light painting looks, and I think it looks pretty good. Maybe right here should have just been bright. I don't know. I think the way I did it looks fine. Okay, let's move on to another image. So if you guys have any questions, feel free. I know there's only a few of you here. So we're going to go back into here, and I'm not going to be able to do another photo that involves a blend, maybe on my next stream, because I actually really want to do this photo. The problem with this one is a focus stack, which shouldn't take as long, but then if I want to blend one of these background layers, it's going to be difficult. But I think this image might turn out with a nice focus stack. Not sure though. So let's try to find an image that is a little simpler and go from there. Thank you, Stu. I agree. I agree the new version is definitely better. So this is obviously too pushed, too saturated, but this was an image I selected. Again, it's another one that I think if I'm going to work on would require some blending. The idea that I had in mind was these three are different bracket exposures at the same time. And then I was possibly going to use some of the light that painted in here. However, I don't think I'd be in love with it just because the light only gets to about here. It doesn't get to our foreground. So maybe I'd have to crop in a specific way. I don't think it would end up working out, but I at least selected them in case we wanted to do something there. I think this photo is probably the one I'm going to talk about now because it doesn't require any intense editing. Excuse me. I edited this a while ago and I'm not sure if it's done or if I want to redo it. But if you guys have any questions, want to talk about anything, feel free. Hope everyone's doing well. Some new names here that I don't recognize, so that's nice. Yeah, what do you guys think of this image? So I think my only problem with this image, so this is the starting point. I think my only problem with this image is a little bit too blue. No, I think I removed the blue. I think the last thing I actually did was, yeah. I've never used Luminar, no. I have not. It's weird that this image is almost grayscale. But for some reason when I turn it to black and white, I don't like it as much. And I don't know if that's because it's too bright right here. I just for some reason like the colored version. Even though the color is super subtle, I don't know. Yeah. I think that this image is pretty much done. I don't know what else I would do to it. So obviously I removed a bunch of saturation from it because when I add the strong contrast in and do some other adjustments, it makes it a little bit too colorful. But I think I really liked the vibes of this desaturated look. So this is it with saturation at 100, or not 100, saturation reset. And it feels a little bit too blue, obviously, in my opinion. And removing some of that just kind of really gives those vibes. Yeah. I think it's weird though, because I don't take a lot of black and white photos or anything or convert a lot. And this, when I look at this image, I immediately think this would look great in black and white. I don't necessarily think it looks bad in black and white, but when I see this version, it's just like, even though the color is really subtle, it just adds something to the image. So I don't know what it is, but I like it. So we'll go with that. Are there any quick images I could edit? Again, this is just a fun one. I just think this is so cool. These little cows roaming around right in front of the Dolomites here. Well, guys, I think I'm just going to end it there, but I'm going to stick around. If you guys have any questions or want to talk about anything, we can. I don't know if there's another photo here that I can really dive into to figure out if I want to do anything with it. Some of these are pretty involved edits, and I might have to basically do another stream of another edit. Some of these are definitely stretches. I don't think these are great compositions. I'm just looking at some of the photos that might be worth touching up. Did I edit this one? I think I already did. That one's kind of cool. Both of these are long exposures. Color range mask. Yeah. Super easy. Maple Leaf House, if you want more, my range mask video talks about it, but we actually just did it in this edit here. I'll just show you what I did. See, now that I look at this, it's too orange. Yeah, I definitely got to look at this with different eyes. So the way I did the color range mask is you just make your adjustment or just add your graduated filter or radial filter in. Come down here, select color under the range mask. Use the dropper to pick the color. So I picked blue. You can see where the dropper was. You can hold shift if you want to add more colors for a wider variety or like wider range of colors. And then deselect the dropper by clicking on it again. And then you can hold Alt over the amount and you can see what it's actually selecting here. That's an easy way to tell, or you can click the show selected mask overlay. Sometimes this is not as easy to tell, and I like using the Alt method. But this is also a quick little button you can press, and anything in pink or red will show you what the mask is selecting. And that's it. That's how you use the color range mask. I don't know if I could blacken out the sky. Could try. It's going to be pretty hard. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to do it unless I Photoshop something. And I don't think it's worth the time. Image isn't anything crazy. This is just a fun little image. I wish that one cow wasn't so far to the left, but it is what it is. It always has a weird white border. The color range mask? So if I do it here, range mask, color, and select blue, obviously it selected parts of this, so I can hold Alt and adjust it to be a little bit stronger. And now if I darken this, it should only be darkening the blue area. Yeah, it's doing a pretty good job. Unless you're talking about, are you talking about it's making like this little white line right here? Is that what you're talking about? Well, if you push it too hard, so if I only pushed it to like -50, this looks fine. Like I can maybe see a tiny bit here. But if I'm really trying to push it, you're obviously going to notice basically what's happening is that's the line that the rocks start and the sky begins. Yeah. What you can do is if you back off a little bit on the amount, not only should it help with the feathering, but between your two subjects, it might help a bit. It really just depends on the photo. So like obviously what I just did is super strong. If I come in here at like 200%, you can see a little bit. But if I back off a little bit, it's not that bad. And then also if you use things like highlights, it's not going to be as bad either. But it really depends on the photo. Because you can see the white line here, but over here you can't. You see that? So it really just depends on how the photo looks and where it selects the mask. And a lot of times it depends on the actual picture you took, how many pixels are in between where the, for example here, where the mountain starts and the sky begins. The other thing you can do is, again, try to add more colors and see if that helps. Obviously it made it worse there, but that might give you a little bit more control. I'm not sure. It really depends on the photo. If you guys are just joining, we're just wrapping up, hanging out, talking. You feel free to ask questions. I'll be on for a couple more minutes. Thank you guys for joining and thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed the edit we did. Yeah, Maple Leaf. Try it on a different photo and see if it does it. Again, if it's really prominent, then that just means you're pushing it too hard. I'm pretty sure, but it really just depends on the photo. Because like you just saw, you could see the white line on the left part of this rock, but you didn't see it on the right part, and that's just because there is I guess the separation here in terms of pixels is a little bit different than the separation of pixels here. I mean, so COVID here is fine. I just choose to be extra, like super extra cautionary. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, just so you guys know, when I post the stream, there is a reminder button. So I posted like a day or two early. And I think there's a button that you can say set reminder if you ever need to do that. But Kedar, I've just been taking it, I don't know if I'm taking it too seriously or what. Anything that doesn't seem like it's worth the risk, I just don't do. Like if I need to go get food from a grocery store, okay, that makes sense. But am I just going to go meet strangers to try to make friends at I don't know, dinner? No, that just doesn't make sense to me. But I really haven't put that much effort into meeting people. I have friends from back home that I still talk to a lot, and I'm pretty introverted, so it's not the worst, but I will say a year without seeing any friends is pretty rough. No worries, Alex. I'll have this posted so you can just go back and watch it. Garg, I don't really know that style. Dark bluish green foliage pictures we see. Oh, are you talking about like the super muted pictures that are very undersaturated and high contrast? If you're talking about that, it's really easy. Just watch my tone curve video. I think you can do everything that those styles are just through the tone curve. Yeah, Billin, that's pretty much how I feel. People are getting vaccines. I'm particularly not. I will be one of the last just because I'm super low risk. So I'd much rather people that actually don't work from home, older, all of the different qualities of stuff that makes you more susceptible. I'd rather them get it first. But I will be vaccinated eventually, just not yet. I mean, realistically, I can go shoot landscape photography without a whole lot of worry. I will say I want to take a trip, but I'm trying not to fly. And I also don't want to drive for like 15 hours. So there's plenty of places around here I can go, though. I've actually, I've gone up to the mountains 5 or 6 times in the last month, trying to record a video, like me going out to shoot photos video. And every time I go for sunset, the conditions are absolutely terrible. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to try to go for sunrise before I have work, and try to get something. Hopefully the conditions will be better. It's just the waking up part that's hard. Yeah, I'm still definitely an introvert, but I think a lot of landscape photographers are introverted. A lot of them like just going out and being by themselves to shoot photos, I think. So that's just a guess. I mean, or that's like a blanket statement. I don't mean everyone is, but yeah, I definitely, I think when the winter ends, my goal is to absolutely be shooting more in the field. It's not that I'm not trying. Like I said, I've gone up at least 5 times, and it's a 3-hour drive up and back. And every single time the conditions are not even, like, I don't even get out of the car. It's like 30, 40 mile an hour winds. It's snowing. It's gray. There's no sun. It's terrible. Yeah, I would love to go to Joshua Tree. I've been through it, but I was younger. Clear outside. I know the app, Alex. The problem is apps, weather predictions in general are not very great for the mountains. A lot of the times I have to just look at a radar myself and then just see where the cloud coverage is. But at the same time, the problem with landscape photography in general is I could look at a weather app. It can tell me it's overcast or cloudy or snowing. But then I could go up there and then the clouds, like the sun just peeks through just enough where it just creates like an absolutely beautiful scene, even though the weather tells me it's terrible. So there's only so much, in my opinion, predicting I can do via the weather. And a lot of the times I just don't even trust it. I just go just to see. And again, that does cause me to go 5 times and not get anything. But my opinion is you just never know what you're going to get until you get up there. So that's kind of how I approach it. Yeah, sunrise and sunset obviously can be very good. It really just depends on where you are. So if you're in a place like Florida, it's a lot easier to predict the conditions for sunrise or sunset. But what I found is being on like on a mountain range right when it starts, the conditions or changes in the weather happen really suddenly. And it could say it's going to be beautiful, and it could not. Or it can say that it's going to be overcast and snowing, and then the sun peeks through just enough at like the right time that it can be gorgeous. See you, Garg. Thanks for joining, man. Yeah. I think the weather predictions for areas without mountains are a little bit more accurate, especially if you're looking at like low pressure stuff in terms of like if you're trying to figure out like a cloud inversion or something like that. But I have found that a lot of the times, even if I just drive up to the mountains and I go south a little bit, the conditions will be different than if I go north 10 minutes. It's really weird. Jordan, I actually have a article on that. It's like the very first article I ever did on f-stoppers. That's super helpful. It is making your own, it's called like My Maps by Google. And basically you make a map. And then the best way is to, if you're going, like, let's say you're going to Iceland. That one's the easiest one. I actually have a My Maps for Iceland. And that one's easy because you just start to pin all the spots that you find that you want to shoot. That's how I would do it. Like, for example, I would be inspired by other people's pictures, those locations, and then I would just research a spot, like, for example, the Dolomites, and do it that way. Yeah, if you search, here, I'll just, 1 second. It's super helpful because in my eyes, it's really hard to remember a lot of places, and it's hard to remember specific spots and stuff like that. And it makes it a lot easier for me to, here, let me get this on the screen. It makes it a lot easier for me to visualize where all the spots are. Here, it's this article. And I go in how to do it. And I use Iceland as an example. But one thing that's really cool is you can drop all the points, but then you can add photos to those points. So like I added photos to spots just because if you can see it, I have no idea how to pronounce this or spell it. But if I know what it looks like in terms of a picture, it's way easier for me to figure that out. And once you're done, like let's say you're going to a specific area like Utah or something, but you have no idea where you want to go yet, I just start putting points down of places of interest and then just see where all the spots are that you generally want to go. A lot of the times people either tag locations or you can figure out the spots. Iceland's really easy because a lot of the spots are famous. Other good resources, I think I talk about them in here. Like Instagram's a good resource for it. 500 pics, you can search locations, also a good resource. But realistically, what I would do is, because I'm assuming you're going to locations because you know there's spots there that you might want to shoot. And it really just depends on where you're going. But I would start here. This to me is super helpful because it really just makes you visually plan out where you want to go. And it's really simple. I mean, you're literally just searching for spots, pinning them down. And then the way I did it, and I talk about it in here, is basically this blue spot was one, like I picked a place to stay where all these were, and then I picked a place to stay where all these were accessible. And that was pretty much it. Oh yeah. Learning where to photograph like a local area, that part is a little harder. I think the easiest way to do that is just go on to 500 pics, or I think Flickr does it as well, and see if you can find geotag spots for that area, like Perth, and then see what people are taking. Yeah, anytime. All right, guys, I think that's pretty much it for me. I'll give it another minute if anyone has any more questions, but I thank you for joining. Thank you for hanging out. I hope the edit was good. Did a lot of the same techniques I've done in my other videos, but that's kind of how editing is. I will say there's things I want to get better at when it comes to blending and thinking outside the box. So things I'm going to work on myself and then hopefully implement into the live streams. What were the sites? Oh, for locations, 500 pics has a, so here, well, I don't want to put it on stream because 500 pics allows not safe for work content, so I don't accidentally want to show that. But you just go into 500 pics and you can put in something like Rocky Mountain National Park, or you can put in Mount Cook National Park, which is in New Zealand, or you can put in Iceland or something like that. And a lot of the spots they have are geotagged. Same with Flickr, and then also Instagram. No worries, Alex. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Simon, as usual. Thank you for being here. Thanks, Stu. Josh, if you need any suggestions, you can always message me on Instagram. I know a lot of the spots in Utah. I actually have a My Maps made for for Utah actually. So astrophotography. Yeah, I actually looked into getting a telescope to shoot more deep space objects. But I had to kind of let go of that thought for now, just because I have more priorities in terms of like things I need to purchase and stuff coming up in the future. But I'm definitely interested in astro, and I will be shooting it. I think I'm going to try to shoot it more like specifically just Milky Way wide angle shots this year, because I used to live in Florida and it was just not very good for astro. But now that I live in Colorado, I have a little bit more access to dark sky areas and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to this year shoot some more astro. The only problem with astro is recording material for it for like a video is a lot more difficult because you're pretty much in the dark. So thanks for joining, Billin. Dog is passed out as usual. Of course, Josh. Anytime. You can't really go wrong with those spots. So. Yeah, that is the point. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you for joining in. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again. I think I'm going to do a stream next week. I might take a week off. I'm not sure. But also, I might try to shoot next Wednesday. So, it really depends. But thanks, everyone. I'll see you again next time. I'll have the stream posted a few days beforehand if I do stream. I should be streaming, but there is a chance that I take it off. Thanks, Kadar. Have a good one, everyone.